Well, many thanks for joining us for this interview, where we'll be speaking to Kerry-Ann Makatiani, the CEO of C&R Group. But really, who is Kerry-Ann? Let's take a look at her profile. Kerry-Ann joined C&R Group in January 2010 and was appointed CEO in January 2011. Kerry-Ann has extensive experience in strategy, project and operational management, gained in Kenya, South Africa, USA and Jamaica. In Nairobi, Kenya, she worked with PwC Consulting as part of the strategic change team, specializing in corporate and business strategy, and with Anderson Consulting in Johannesburg, South Africa, as a senior consultant in strategic services. During her graduate studies, she worked for Citibank, New York, where she analyzed and prepared Citibank's competitive profile in 40 key countries as part of a U.S. bank's strategy project to develop value propositions and client solutions for increased competitiveness. She holds an MBA in Finance and Management from Stern School of Business, New York, USA, a postgraduate diploma in Marketing from Jamaica Institute of Management, and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Swarthmore College in the United States. Thank you so much for coming on to the Trading Bell. Such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Abdi. It's my pleasure to be here. Since watching the show, it's really become one of my favorite shows, and I'm honored to be invited to participate. Thank you.
Really glad to have you. And let's just begin by you walking us through what C&R Group does for the capital markets.
Okay. C&R Group, we are share registrars. We're one of the largest, one of the oldest and largest share registrars. We've been in the business for over 30 years, incorporated in 1981. 1986, my apologies. So many years of experience. A share registrar, the role of a share registrar traditionally has been to maintain records of shareholders and also to process registration requests. But what we've seen is that increasingly C&R and other registrars are being required to become more of a, I'd call it an investor relations service provider, because we are providing services in the realm of what would be investor relations role. So as C&R, we're usually the interface between our listed companies and their shareholders. So if there's a query, or so not just related to a registration request, but even a query in terms of what's happening with the company in terms of information that may be out there in the public media, shareholders do come into the registrar. So what we find is a lot of times we have to align our communications with what the company wants to put out in the public. So we'll actually even get a briefing in terms of what we say to shareholders, because they will come in to our offices. We're an interface with the regulator. So if there's a query or a complaint, either the regulator or the shareholder will come to the registrar to provide the information to clarify or resolve that. We're an interface with other stakeholders. So brokers, there are some requests that have to come through brokers. So we both have to receive those requests and also provide information to brokers. And also with the Central Depository Settlement Corporation, the CDSC. Because we have both accounts on the CDSC platform and certificated accounts. So there's constant interaction between us and the CDSC, where we have to do what we call balance the register. So we have to balance the register in terms of the positions of the traded accounts versus the certificated, and create the register for a corporate activity, whether it's monthly reporting or a dividend payment or an AGM attendance registration list, so that we get the current position of the shareholders. So we're always receiving and providing data files with the CDSC.
All right. Quite a host of activities you do there. And you've been the CEO since 2011. And what would you describe the Kenyan capital markets being like?
The Kenyan capital markets, it's quite active, and maybe I would say here, in terms of the profile of what's happening in the market, it very much mirrors what's happening globally. And if I could just interject here, one of the things that we have done, we take being an investor relations service provider very seriously, and that involves learning and understanding what's happening globally. Last year we did an executive visit to one of the largest share registrars in the UK. Yeah. And the similarities between what's happening there in their capital markets and what they as a share registrar are handling for their companies and shareholders is very similar to what we're seeing here. So it's a very dynamic industry. We're seeing a lot of the trends, shareholders becoming more active, more aware of their rights, more vocal. We're seeing companies have to rely more on how they communicate and engage with stakeholders and shareholders. So very much in line with what's happening globally, quite a dynamic industry.
And right now, the capital markets, you're seeing the numbers have been growing in terms of listings. And if you're to look on a comparative scale, how are we performing as an economy, especially the likes of South Africa and Nigeria? As much as we are leading in East Africa, how do we sort of play in the biggest picture of things?
That's an interesting question. As with any global market, what's happening current affects listings. So, for example, we've just come through an active election year last year. So that obviously affected the dynamics. So it'd be very hard to compare year on year because each country or each exchange is having their own regional challenges.
Sure.
So coming out of what was a very active election period that obviously results in very quiet and corporate activity, we're looking forward to now renewed activity next year.
All right. And for the companies out there that are really keen on sort of working with you in terms of improving their investor relations, what bigger role can you play moving forward, especially when it comes to the companies that are yet to fully understand what C&R is all about?
Okay. That's another good question. I think a lot of companies don't fully understand what investor relation means. And when we look at trends that are happening, this is actually going to become a critical space for listed companies. So I'll touch both in terms of what's happening with investor relations and how we can assist our companies.
Yeah.
So if we look at investor relations and say a listed company, and maybe two key concerns that a listed company has, which is managing their price volatility. You don't want to have price volatility on the exchange.
Yeah.
And also managing how shareholders approve resolutions. Those actually directly play into the investor relations space. One of the things that listed companies are concerned about is ensuring that there's no information gap between what a market has in terms of their valuations and what they have as in terms of their valuations, because that directly leads to price volatility. You also want your stakeholders, both shareholders and the investing community, to be aligned with the strategy as a listed company, because you want your asset to be held as a long-term asset. You don't want quick buy and sells, which impacts on price volatility. And same when you're having AGMs, a lot of the resolutions have to be approved by shareholders. You want that to be very efficient with very minimal disruptions.
All right.
So having said that, how does that play into investor relations and why is investor relations important? We've been looking at research and, as I said, engaging with a UK share registrar to understand global trends. And if we look at even 4 or 5 of the main investor relation trends that will have an impact, they say, in the next few years, it directly relates to the concerns that listed companies have. One of these, and I'll lump 2 of them together, market transparency and shareholder need for communication. Shareholders are increasingly needing to have both transparency and security when they're making investments. So they look at the disclosures that companies put out. Are the disclosures adequate? Are the disclosures having the information that they think they need to make their investment? And then we look at the other research that says more, some research says over 2/3, even up to 77% of shareholders want companies to better engage with them. So therefore, companies need to look at how are they getting out this information, these disclosures to their shareholders. Are they engaging with shareholders in the channels that shareholders need? So not just traditional mail-outs or circulars, but are you engaging in the social media space?
Yes.
We have very tech-savvy shareholders. Social media space also plays into providing information for them. So then that also leads into what we look at the change in shareholder profiles. Shareholders are increasingly moving from being passive investors where automatically approving resolutions to becoming more active. They're asking questions at AGMs.
Sure.
And there's even a trend in what is called investor stewardship, where they're taking a personal role in the decisions that are being made. So they will even vote against a decision if they feel it's not aligned to their interest, even possibly becoming activists. And we've seen that playing out, where if shareholders are not happy with the disclosures or the information, or they believe it contradicts with their own valuation,
Sure.
they actually play this out in communications and actually can become quite disruptive.
All right.
And then the last one in terms of managing those concerns is also looking at the sell side, because there are other parties in the capital markets that are involved in valuations of brokers, investment advisors. So companies need to look at how they engage with them, not just for when they're having deals, but also what they call non-deal roadshows. How do you engage with that so the information that they're putting out as well is consistent with your market valuation, so you don't have that information gap.
All right.
So investor relations is critical
Totally
to what's
mutating.
happening.
All
Yes, it is. It's evolving constantly.
All right. And of course, Kerry, you and I know that technology is very disruptive in this day and age.
Yes.
And of course, many companies are trying to embrace technology. And for you as an organization, how critical is the technology space, especially now that you've also mentioned that you are dealing with a very tech-savvy client base?
Yes. Yes, that's actually a discussion that we're very, very passionate about. One of our values as C&R is technology enablement and innovation. And what we realize is that a lot of people don't realize how technology reliant share registry and investor relations is. And it's a discussion that we're actively trying to drive. And in fact, it's one of the reasons as a company where we're hosting an investor relations conference, which we're hosting on the 4th of October. And again, it's coming out of sharing learnings and discussions on investor relations and realizing that this is a discussion that has a lot of interest and is suited for a wider platform. So two of the things that we're looking at there that speaks exactly what some of the questions that you're asking is technology and what it means for the capital markets industry and also investor relations and what it means, and I spoke about that.
Yeah.
And going back to technology and C&R, one of the things that we've realized is that when I joined C&R, we've moved from a single system company to a multi-system company, and we have to do that to keep in line with what's happening with investor relation trends. The system that we had in place when I first joined, we had a core system and our dividend reconciliation system, which you have to have when you're managing hundreds of thousands of records and monitoring and hundreds of dividend accounts. But more so than that, in the recent years, we've had to deploy technology to keep abreast of what's happening. Digitization of records, that's critical. We've been digitizing all of our records. As new regulations come into place, sometimes the information that you need to meet the compliance requirements or reporting requirements of those regulations requires you to go back to old records. Now, physically retrieving those records year and tear, you can't do that. You have to have that information at hand.
Yeah.
Shareholders want information instantly. Regulators want responses instantly. You have to have those records digitally available. So digitization of records is critical. We've been going on a digital platform. We have a queue management system, and that allows us to understand why shareholders come into our offices. Is it linked to an activity that the company is doing? Is it linked to a general question in the capital markets industry? But it gives the kind of data analytics that companies need to understand what are shareholders' interests, what are their concerns. But I think the two systems that I would want to talk to the most would be our CRM system, where anything that comes in is digitally recorded and any processing activity is recorded. So it gives us a 360-degree view. So when a shareholder comes in or there's a query coming in, anyone who is on our CRM platform knows what interactions we've had with that shareholder, what information they've provided, what information we have given to them. So it provides a very holistic view.
All right.
And then critically, our share hub.
Interesting.
And that's our newest platform that we've been involved in, and it's an integrated services platform. So again, looking at how we can provide services in many ways to shareholders, to companies. For example, we can host an online AGM. AGMs are how shareholders interact with companies. So the better participation in an AGM, but many shareholders are spread very far locally, even internationally. So how do you get them to attend an AGM? Companies are going to online AGMs. Our platform is set up to do that, to enable those kind of interactions. It enables shareholders to come in and query their dividend status. Do they have unclaimed dividends? Because then those are at the risk of going to the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. How do they manage those investments? How do they keep abreast of what the company is doing? We can give information on the corporate events calendar when a dividend is being paid, so they know to look out for it, when an AGM is happening, and just even any notices or circulars that shareholders need to receive, we can host it. So it enables us to provide a wider range of communication channels for interactions between companies, their shareholders, and also stakeholders.
All right. You must have spent a fortune on this.
We actually invest quite heavily in technology systems. I mean, in 2012, we invested in a storage access network system where we do real-time data backups of our data, because that's critical data. So we invest heavily in our systems. And as I said, with visits to the UK share registrar, it confirmed what we said. And I think coming out of this conference, there'll be some parallels that will be very interesting. The parallel between what's happening globally and what we're seeing in East Africa and Kenya, and two, also the parallels about how much technology is actually used in a share registry investor relations business. It's actually quite astounding.
Interesting. And of course, Kerry, what keeps you awake at night when you look at the risks associated with what you do, especially with cyber crime happening across African countries? What would be your parting shot as we wrap up this interview?
The parting shot, I would say, would be with technology. Obviously, yes, as you mentioned, you're dealing with systems and data, and there's always a risk of infiltration. So alongside technology enablement and innovation, it's also very important to keep up with your IT audits, your systems audits, and just even penetration audits, because you want to, as much as possible, ensure that data is protected and that the data itself has integrity. All
right. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me here.
Very thrilling and engaging interview.
Thank you.
A pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you so much, Abby.
Well, that is Kerry-Ann Makatiani just talking to us about the role that they play in the capital markets, and quite a host of activities indeed that we have been able to unpack for you. Well, we want to take a look at the market's performance for this week in our markets analysis coming up.
Okay. Now, you've talked about inflation. That's correct. But you know that inflation, especially the cost push element of it, is really a matter of food and fuel.